shield Greasy
That was
boy.
spooky.
Oh no! Stop.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
I
okay.
heard you love you would love Greasy.
Playing
Watch
safe.
all.
Safe block strength.
Phantom has
You would love
Phantom has the
Greasy.
It's just kind of weird to like hit confirm there. Oh, you love 3C. Yeah. Instead of checking, going for the hit.
That's so good.
What's up, y'all? Phantom here, and today we'll be going over air neutral. I'll be going over movement options, air doors and anti-air options, some major concepts to go over, some techniques, common scenarios, and in-game application and replay analysis of my actions. If you're a beginner, I recommend starting at the movement section. If you're an intermediate player, I recommend starting at the major concept section. However, it doesn't hurt to start at the beginning as well for a nice refresher. With that, let's get started. So universally, characters have 2 jumps and an air dash. Like so. If you do an air dash on the ground, it's called the instant air dash, or ID for short, and it uses up a jump. See, I can't jump after that again. In Moondrive, this increases to 3 jumps and 2 air dashes. 3 jumps, and then you can use 2 air dashes. It is pretty important to take note when you are in Moondrive that you do get this extra movement. The air dashes themselves are also quite unique. So in Tono's case, he has a pretty short air dash, whereas CL has a little bit of a longer air dash. And then characters like Roa have a horizontal air dash like this. Each air dash has its own unique purpose in neutral, and have different goals. There's also Super Jump, which is a very buffed up version of a jump that changes your momentum and angle drastically. There's a Super Jump right here. It knows how far it goes. It's very important when dealing with zoners, and just overall a really good approach in neutral. If you input a Super Jump while in the air, you get a different angle. Notice how it doesn't go that far, but the angle at which it lands is quite different than a usual jump. This is important for mixing up your landing angles. So. Finally, we'll go talk about air stalls. And this is very character specific, so depending on your character, it may or may not be different for you. In Saber's case, she has a dive kick. So on top of your 2 jumps and air dash, she could also do a dive kick to completely throw off your timing. So you can do this as well, that's all your jumps and air dashes. However, you can still dive kick. And many other characters have their own unique air stall or air option in general, and that is for you to research upon. Now let's talk about some air-to-airs and anti-airs. Let's start off with air-to-airs, and I'll start off with JA, which is a really strong air-to-air. JA is really strong as you retain your air options after you whiff a button. So normally with other buttons like JB, JC, you cannot do anything after you press said button. I'm trying to jump again, but you just can't. With JA, you can still cancel. So you do JA whiff, and then still JC. JA whiff, jump again. JA whiff, ID. Is a much safer option to engage on a air opponent, and it's really strong to be able to properly use JA in neutral. Next up will be JB and JC, which will be very character dependent, and usage may vary. But for the most part, it will be used in either approaches or preemptively catching an opponent's approach. So here as work, I could probably do something like JC as an approach right here. Since it's really active, it's pretty strong as a jump-in option. Or JB, same thing depending on your character. And it's also strong against catching your opponent's approach for how active it is. So in PCL, probably doing a recording with this. Preemptively do a button like this, catch your opponent trying to press a button. We'll use Roa as another example because his JA and JB have some different angles that they cover. For example, his JA is hits a little bit lower than usual. Doesn't mean you can't use it as an air-to-air, but in cases like this, it may be a little bit hard. For example, I get punished there. However, his JB covers that angle pretty well, so you may have to resort to using JB here, like so. Speaking of JC, some characters have a charge version of their Gem C. So in Tona's case, he has normal JC, and he gets a charged version. Same with Saber as well in this case. Charge JC is strong because usually they have a lot of clash frames, and they also have an easy ground bounce for comboing. So here's the clash frames in this example. Be strong, and your opponent has to properly respond to the clash frames. And as for the combo, pretty easy. Makes it pretty easy to combo because of the ground bounce. Some characters JC may operate differently from this, but the usual standard is that they can combo pretty easily, and they also have clash frames. Some additional notes on Charge JC is that although it is a very strong button, it does have some negatives. If you happen to whiff JC and you land to the ground, you're actually -6. Normally you're -2 when you land after any button, or just in general. However, if you do JC, you're -6. Meaning if you whiff it in the air and your opponent's already on the ground, it will most likely punish your landing recovery. In terms of beating the clash on Charge JC, there are a couple options, but if you have jump available, you could do two things. You could either jump block or jump throw. So here's an example of a jump block. Block it like that, or you could throw it after the jump. For which option I usually do? I usually do jump block, just because jump throw is also very like height dependent and also distance dependent. Like if you're too far away, then throw a whiff and then you'll die even, you'll also still die, so. For example, see I whiff throw there, it's kind of come too far. This is why I usually default the jump block. Like that. Now if your button clashes with Charge JC and you're out of jumps, it's gonna be a little bit harder to deal with and you're probably going to get hit. You can still throw after the clash, but once again, it also depends on your distance and height. So, like right there, I could throw. Then see, I'm too far away there, and I can't really throw. And I'm also out of jump, so I can't jump block. So, in those cases, you're probably screwed. Speaking of air throw, another option you can do as an air-to-air is air throw. Now air throw is strong because 1 frame startup in the air. So combined with your jump startup, it's around 5 to 6 frames startup, making it one of the fastest options to do. It's really strong if you recognize that the opponent's gonna be right in front of you or point blank range. Otherwise, it's a very situational option as most buttons outrange air throw. So you really have to position yourself in order to air throw properly. My usual usage of air throw is using it on defense against someone doing an IAD or jump at me, as it covers for both. Another universal anti-air that you could do is just stand shielding it. Now stand shield of course has its own RPS with shield RPS and whatnot being introduced, but if you're not in a position where you could properly anti-air, then stand shield may be your only option. This is especially important against characters that you can't properly anti-air in time, like PCO's JC. Just like with how some characters have different types of air stalls, some characters have some really strong grounded anti-air options. For example, Saber has 3BC, PCL has 5C, Aki has 6-3, and the list goes on. I'm not going to go through all the character-specific anti-airs, but depending on your character, to figure out what would be a good anti-air option for you if you can't cover a certain angle in time, and determine what is best. It's now time to talk about my favorite anti-air of all time, 3C. 3C is a universal anti-air that has head involve on frame 5, and each character has its own unique 3C, so usage may vary from character to character, but for the most part, most characters can use 3C in the same way. Like so. 3C is a really strong anti-air at covering spaces that you normally can't cover because the head involve is really strong, so it's really good in those cases. But people don't like 3C just because of how often it clashes. So people don't like this situation right here. People don't like the situation right here. Like that. V-Sweek and JA there. But there's two things I'd like you to note. As a 3C'er, you actually have 3 frames of advantage to act. This will be important in the next thing I'll be telling you guys. And that is that you could jump cancel and special cancel after a clash. Here's an example of the jump cancel. Like that. And jump cancel includes that you could also jump throw as well. Here's an example of jump throw. Like that. However, the jump throw is also, once again, similar to how JC clashes, is very distance dependent, height dependent. So like, if it's like really far away, like, see, I can't really jump throw there. But it is an option that is universally available to most of the characters. You'd also special cancel after 3C, so. You can also special cancel. Like that. And notice how Arc 228 wins there. Like I said, the 3C has 3 frames of advantage. Hisui's JA is 5 frames, and yet Arc's 228 is 6 frames, and yet Arc's 228 is winning. Just because hers is acting a little bit faster than Hisui JA after the 3C clash, very specific 3C clash. And this is why it's so good, because you get a suddenly good starter now after a clash situation. You get a 228 starter. I don't play Arc, but a 228 starter is probably pretty strong. Another point of concern with 3C is the hitbox and the forward movement. So in Tono's case, he has a really strong 3C because he doesn't move forward at all, he stands still, and also hits at a really good angle, which makes this very nice to do. But not all characters are blessed with the same 3C. Mash, for example, has a very tiny hitbox with the leg, and also moves a ton, as you can see. She moves a lot, so in the same angle, she'll overshoot. So that is another point of concern. So this is pretty annoying to deal with, especially because of how Super Jump is and how it only approaches you at like one specific angle. So if you can't cover that angle, then it's really annoying. It means you have to like slightly walk back a little bit, and then 3C. It's especially annoying in the corner because if you try to 3C in the same way, you actually get crossed up, so... like so. And in this case, I would Stone Hat, and I'll show you what Stone Hatting is later, and that should be important in dealing with this, but in the corner, you definitely cannot 3C there. It will not work. If you want to see Tono's case with 3C in this, it should work normally. Like so. Now don't get too discouraged and try not to use 3C just because of the forward movement. The characters I play, Tono, Roa, and Miyako. Tono doesn't have a forward moving 3C, but Miyako and Roa do. Miyako especially, very forward moving 3C, and also is pretty short in height. Same with Roa, but not as forward moving. But regardless, it's still really good to cover those angles with 3C. It is very important, especially if they're out of jumps, which I'll go over in another section. But if they're out of jumps and you have the right angle, 3C is pretty much free, which is why I would advise you to continue using 3C in those cases. And yeah. Now with all the information given, I'm literally going to go through all the characters and show you what I think is the most practical 3C clash cancel I see that is good for them. Well, this is Future Phantom here, and the 3C clash cancel section ended up being a little too long. It was like about 15 minutes for all the single characters, so I ended up making a separate video on it, link in the description and also on the channel. So you can watch that if you want to see a 3C clash cancels, and then come back to this guide to continue watching. So yeah. I will begin to talk some concepts about air neutral. Let's talk about reactive, initiative, and preemptive play. If you're familiar with the 3 structures of neutral, then this is exactly just that. I mentioned grounded neutral will be inevitably introduced here, and this section will be very important with it. Reactive play refers to reacting to your opponent's option, whether to be a jump in or an IAD. The reactive player reacts to the specific option and counters it accordingly. Initiative play beats reactive play by initiating an option to throw off a reactive player. For example, I run a button. It is very difficult for the reactive player to check both options at the same time, so by initiating these options, it will be difficult for the reactive player. Preemptive play is placing options preemptively to stop initiating in future options. If the opposing player isn't ready to stop preemptive buttons, then preemptive buttons will usually be a safe option to stop approaches automatically. However, it loops all back to reactive play, by reacting to such preemptive options and punishing it accordingly. Having this knowledge in mind is very important when playing out the neutral. You will need to be able to acknowledge the opponent's goals and play around it. Let's apply these 3 concepts into the air neutral. Let's use a common situation using Arc as an example. Imagine a scenario where Arc is jumping back and you want to stop it, preferably with a JA. You run up and super jump JA, but the Arc player chooses to react to the key of both your actions, and you get countered by our JC. It may sound unbeatable, but as mentioned, playing reactively comes with some trade-offs. This is where choosing to be initiative on the ground comes into play. Because our arc is looking to react to certain cues, in this case, you running up and jumping, she now opens you getting your landing recovery, or getting anti-aired. In order for the arc player to beat you taking the initiative like this, she would have to place her JC low to the ground preemptively to stop you from running up. But now the situation loops back to the first example, where the attacker wants to super jump JA at the arc. In a situation like this, the one playing preemptively would now lose, because the preemptive button is now not covering for the opponent's air-to-air. It's a constant moving cycle, where playing reactionary beats preemptiveness, initiating beats reactionary, and preemptiveness beats initiating. I want to clarify that the three concepts don't exactly have to loop back to each other, and especially in the context of the air neutral. For example, in the same arc scenario where Miyako super jump JAs, the arc can either be doing a reactive JC on the run up, or a preemptive JC, and in both cases, the Miyako here is initiating to beat the JC. The difference between a reactive JC and a preemptive JC is absolutely important in trying to play around the opponent. If the opponent is preemptively JCing, regardless of your positioning, you could gain a lot of information from it. You can see how they react to your options, and let's say you run up wait, or just wait in general and see how they act. They may be playing many options preemptively, and perhaps without thought, and with good analysis of this, you can counteract these preemptive options. It is incredibly important to acknowledge what the goal of the opponent is after a certain action. Are they trying to react to certain options? Are they preemptively placing options down? It is your job as a player to realize what the opponent wants and play around it, and initiate accordingly. Now with all the concepts out of the way, let's talk about some techniques now. Let's start off with fuzzy mash. So what fuzzy mashing is essentially holding back or holding 4 while pressing any sort of button during a jump in or some attack. So in this case, I'll let Arc do JC. I'm going to fuzzy mash 5A. And just like that. So you notice how my 5A didn't come out on block because I was inputting it during a block stun of JC, and the moment the arc did an empty low, I fuzzy mashed immediately. Fuzzing is pretty important in the air neutral because it could get a little bit hectic sometimes, and it's a little bit hard to track what is going on if you're not really paying attention. But fuzzing mashing allows you to pretty much always be prepared for any sort of like quick scramble. Like that, like a lot of things could happen where like the JA could whiff and then you prepare to mash right away, you're first. So this is very important knowledge. It could get very hectic. Like so. Once you fuzzy mash, you're prepared and you pretty much win the situation. Always fuzzy mash, or try your best to fuzzy mash on opponent's jump in, so you could always get the mash in time. What about stone hatting? And now this is mainly only in the corner, however, it can apply a lot of certain areas if you're ready for it and like the situation calls for it. But what stone hat is essentially it's a micro walk where you crouch and then you walk forward to get out of the way of something. I'll show you what I mean. Like so, you duck under, walk forward, and then you're able to duck the JC and go right behind them and swap sides. This is really important, especially at this distance where opponents like to flail at you. Like this is pretty much free stone hat right here. There's also other applications to it, but this is one of the more important ones, especially. Now, if the opponent has a cross-up button like Sia with her JB, then you can't quite stone hat the same as if I try to do this, you're gonna get hit like this, or like get hit by a block. You do swap sides, which is good, but it's gonna be CL's turn at this point. But what you can do is something called a stone hat backdash. So a little bit tired to input, but this is a way to get out a cross-up buttons. So yeah. Or you could just take the side swap like that. But for the most part, those are your two options against the cross-up buttons. As mentioned, there's also some other applications besides just like a super jump flail out, like during offense when they jump. Immediately recognize that and then go for the stone hat. Another common application is after your opponent uses air dash when you're really close to the corner like this. So. Or if you want to flex, you could also stone hat a throw bait type IED, for example, like this. Like so, but this is like, that's a flex. Like if you do it, you're flexing. split screen is not as useful, but if you can recognize it, then it is pretty useful. But at that point, you might as well anti-air. I'll show you what I mean here. Like some sort of string, stone it right there. But at that point, you can just do like 3C. Especially because like usually the jump ins they do, they're probably gonna like jump from like a farther distance, like around here somewhere. Now this is like kind of rare, but like they can still do this. But 3C will cover for both this and this, which is why I prefer doing 3C here instead of stone hatting. A bonus tip is that if you shield and they BC out, you can almost always stone hat this. The input is crouch shielding during their shield BC out, and then you just micro walk out. Like so. Now with all the concepts and techniques out of the way, it's time to talk about some scenarios. We'll be going through a lot of scenarios, so this will be one of the most important sections, so do pay attention. The first, let's talk about an offensive jump in. So I consider this like an offensive jump in, where they're jumping at me. Like this. I consider this an offensive jump in. So let's talk about offensive single jump. And let's first talk about offensive jump in general. Like that. Now first, acknowledge how the JC is being placed here. If you remember in the concept section, with the preemptive and reactive JCs, you could consider a jump in a quote-unquote reactive JC because it's in reaction to my current position, as the arc is wanting to press JC where I am on the ground. So this means you have two options. The first option is that you could anti-air, so in this case I'll 3C here. Like so. The second option is to just JA intercept. Remember, acknowledge how the JC is being placed here. Because the JC is being placed for me on the ground, it won't be fast enough for a JA intercept. As mentioned, because it is a single jump, you have to acknowledge that the opponent has two other jumps. Like that, and like that. Those two options you do have to be aware of because they only burn a single jump, and you have to keep counting those options. So be mindful of that when trying to anti-air or air intercept them, because it will whiff. If the opponent realizes that you're trying to J intercept them every time they do a jump in, they may be more inclined to do a preemptive JC instead. So in this case, if I do J here, I'll lose. The timing also is perfect for the opponent to still do a normal landing JC. Notice how this still hits crouching. It's also because arc JC is pretty broken. But besides the point, things like anti-airs and 3Cs are very important here. This 3C will land cleanly because the JC is more active in the air rather than on the ground. And whatever other anti-air you have, this is the best time to use it. A very important option that you could do against preemptive JCs like this is doing a preemptive JA of your own. If you're expecting them to jump at a certain time, you can preempt the JA. Another important factor is seeing how they actually get hit here. And notice how they could get hit with non-fatal or fatal. And notice how early the fatal is. Notice how there's no fatal there. So it's hard to get some information from that. And notice how there's a fatal there. If there's a slightly early fatal, it means they're trying to target your JA attempt. Here's what I mean by that. If an opponent wants to do a normal jump in, like I mentioned before, we can simply jump and delay the JA to get the fatal. Like so. Notice if we do JA really early, there's no fatal. This is very important to acknowledge. Again, this will show the difference between a preemptive JC and a reactionary JC. A very fun thing I like to do is just jumping in the air with them preemptively and then waiting to see what they do. Like that. If they don't do anything after a while, it means they probably want to jump in on you and do a jump in button rather than a preemptive JC. Which means, what I like doing is doing a delay JA. Like that. Doing a delay JA here means that they're trying to JC you on the ground, and they don't expect you in the air, and it's already too late by then. For preemptive JCs, of course, if you try to delay the JA, you're going to get hit here, obviously, or block, which is both are not that bad. But if you do end up blocking here, it means they're preemptively placing the button rather than reactionary. And you get a lot of information from this, as this allows you to, instead of doing the delay JA, you can always do the immediate JA. Like that. Now the final layering that the opponent could do to beat your JA like this is just waiting for you at the end of the day. Remember the 3 concepts of initiating, reactionary, and preemptiveness? What we're doing is preemptive JA, so if the opponent just waits, they can punish your JA. Like that. And of course another layer to this is if they're waiting too long, run up. Remember, at the end of the day, apply the 3 concepts of reactionary, preemptiveness, and initiating. As for how to jump in yourself, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is think about the counters that we're talking about and the layers behind it, and just think of it on your side instead. For once you represent it, it's pretty straightforward. You can pretty much do it at any sort of time. If your character has a good special, you can always represent a special, and then at any moment you can just jump. Jump is also just nice in general to just dodge other specials like Arc Rekka, for example. You can always just jump right here. It is like a pretty decent option. After the layerings behind a single jump in, if they don't respond to your jump in at all, then you can probably continue to do so until they actually try to stop it. So like if I try to do this and they don't really respond at all, like you can probably continue to do so. The moment you see them try to actually react to it, do take note of it. For example, if I try to do this again, you'll try JB this time, and take note of that. As to how to deal with it, remember you have another jump and an air dash. So if you want to bait it out, you can always just like jump and then back air dash like that. Or if you want to really target it, you can always do a bunt early in the air rather than hitting on the ground, like I mentioned before, like a preemptive JC in the air to hit the arc as she's trying to react to it. Do be mindful in trying to place preemptive buttons like this. Again, it's related to character dependent. In the arc example we did before, her JC happened to cover both preemptive JC and like on the ground JC. But if I try to do like Miyako JB for example, it's not gonna hit the arc here. Same with like JC. If I hit it really high up in the air, so that is just something you have to acknowledge for sure. Now moving on to them doing a preemptive jump, for example. This is a pretty common situation where both players could jump at the same time, and then the arc would probably just do a preemptive JA while you're not expecting it. So like something like this is pretty common. So if you really want to avoid a situation like this, you can always just wait it out, see what they do, and then punish accordingly like that. I also have a super jump, which is a strong approach to neutral due to its drastic movement. Although it is a strong approach, it's also one of the most autopilot options to use in the game, and I want you to be able to stop violent super jumps and make them change their approach immediately. Just like a normal jump in, notice how JC is being placed here. Just like an offensive jump in, the JC is being placed here with the intent to hit me on the ground. So if you try JA here, it'll be free, as the JC will not be fast enough in the air. Like so. Another option that you could do, as my personal preference, is you get 3C. Works the same exact way. You'll see later why I like doing 3C when I talk about how they can mix their options, but 3C is pretty strong here. If you have any other anti-airs, you can use that as well. For the opponent to stop them from anti-airing them, they could do a couple options. One option is using their additional jump and air dash. Remember, they still have a jump and an air dash left. We'll talk about how to deal with this in another section, which will cover every single air option. Another thing that they could do, although a riskier one, is placing a preemptive JC early to stop for the JA attempt. Notice how early the JC is being placed here. Very early. So if I try JA, I'll always lose. With this, 3C becomes even easier to hit because if they do preemptive JC like that, it will even miss crouching like this. And then you get 3C. Like so. Another way, in a character dependent way, is using Charge JC. Charge JC is strong is because you try to reactively JA on the JC attempt, it'll probably clash. Like so. If you watch the JC section, you'll know that you can both jump block and jump throw it. But as we can know, jump throw is pretty inconsistent because it's very distance dependent. See right there, throw whiffed. So in this case, 3C becomes even more free. You can see them charging the JC. So once they're committed to the charge JC, 3C becomes even more free because they cannot do an air cancel after that. You see them charging the JC like that, so you know 3C is free there. For how to use it, you can use it whenever you want. Just make sure not to autopilot on its usage, especially if they can punish it every single time. So you can always mix up your neutral options and then super jump eventually. But if they always check the super jump, remember to mix it up, like with a super jump, for example. Or whatever option you could do to mix it up. As for the layering of it, once again, just refer to the counters, but from the opponent's perspective. Now let's talk about defensive single jump, or up back, so this. Now for how to deal with this, it is pretty hard to deal with because they have another jump still and an air dash at any moment. And with how JC is being placed here, it's really hard to actually JA here. Like that. It can be pretty hard to actually contest this. Here's also some examples of them mixing jump and air dash. Like that, where my JA could whip like that. Another very common option to use with air dash is them up backing for a bit and then air dashing at you as an approach, like this. Another common mix-up that they could do is doing up back into them pulling up on you. Like this, she pulls up. She could also do something like this. She pulls up. And this is really annoying to deal with. They're trying to stop their up back and then they just approach you randomly. It's just really hard to really contest, guys. They have too much options available to them. As for how to deal with up back, you have two main options. You get a hard commit to their punish, or just wait for their actions. For hard committing, it depends on how they throw out the JC. For example, they can always throw the JC in the air really high up to stop the air-to-air, like this. Well, it makes them vulnerable on the ground, because this is not going to hit the ground, as you can see there. So in this case, you can commit to a run up 2C, and you have to commit to it. If you're ever too slow and recognize an up back, they can always change up the option immediately if you're not ready for it. Like that. This is why you have to recognize immediately if they're trying to up back like this and punish accordingly. Now if they try to do JC like this, this will hit your run up. You can't really run up 2C at this angle, or she'll get hit like that. Your option here is flailing at them. With either that, or a super jump. Like that. I would like to restate the fact that you have to commit here. This is not something you could really properly react to. I can't not react to the jump and then JA in time. She's just simply too far away. You have to commit to the option the moment you see it. Now the second option is just to wait it out. If the opponent that is up backing is somehow impatient, then you can just wait to see what they do after they up back, because they are a lot farther away from you and they're playing pretty lame. But if they want to go in at you at some point, then they may implement an option. Like I mentioned, a very common approach that opponents might like to do is up back into eventual air dash. Like this. So by just waiting a little bit and staying in the air dash, boom. React 3C and punish, just like that. Or you could JA. Like that. Now waiting is definitely not the best idea against characters that are 1, patient, and 2, are zoners, because giving them more space is probably really bad for you, especially a character like Vlav. Try to do this and just waiting to see what they do, and you're already entering his game plan. So in this case, waiting is definitely not the right option here. Now for how to use it, you have a lot of ways of going about it. One way is just mindlessly do it, regardless of the opponent's position, and seeing how they react. Sometimes they're going to be really impatient, and then they just run into your JC. That's one way to go about doing this. The other thing that you can do is read and react to your opponent's options. Now this is a lot harder depending on the distance. For example, if you're really close, then you can't quite react to your opponent's options. It's rather a read. The further you are, the easier it is to react, as you have more distance to cover. And because you have more distance to cover, they're forced to run up or super jump, both of which are more reactable. You can combine the uses of offensive jump and defensive jump to see how they react. For example, if you jump every time and they react with JA, like that, you get a lot of information. They may flinch on any single jump they do, whether it be an offensive jump or a defensive jump. So if I do this, they might flinch, and even if I do this, they might flinch as well. That's just something you may take note of. If they do something like this, they'll be more inclined to still continue to air you immediately after you jump. A very common thing that they like to do probably is super jump JA at you immediately once they see the jump. In cases like this, it's honestly really hard for the opponent to still hit you because the up back just covers so much space. Where the JA is gonna whiff. And in cases like this, 3C is pretty free because they expect their JA to hit, but it's just too far for it to hit. For everything else is pretty straightforward. Just refer to the counters that you'll be doing, but take it to the opponent's perspective. If they like doing air to airs, just pre up JC in the air. And if you like doing run-ups, place JC lower on the ground. This section will be pretty much going over everything else. Double jump air dash, jump air dash jump. It's important to include all the options here, because it's hard to ignore one without the other. What I mean by that is that if they use both their jumps, then the last option is air dash. That's 2 jumps. And after the air dash like that, that is their last air option unless they have an air stall. So this information in mind is very important. Let's first talk about offensive double jump. So this. Well, they use both their jumps to try to jump in on you. The only reason the opponent's doing this is most likely to bait an anti-air from you. If you try to flinch anti-air on a single jump, then the double jump will make it whiff. Like that. However, besides it baiting anti-airs, it is not a good jump in because you have so much more time to react to the jump itself, meaning you can J intercept a lot later. Like that. For the opponent to stop you from doing JA like that, they have to place JC even higher up in the air. Like that. If I try to do JA here, I'll get hit. Like that. But because they use both their jumps, their elevation is a lot higher, so that means it's never ever going to hit me on the ground. The only other option that they could do is use their air dash. But remember, now that both jumps are being used, and the air dash is finally used as well, they're out of options. 3C is free here. There's nothing they could do. They're out of jumps, they have no other option. Unless they have an air stall. But once they have all their options consumed, 3C is very free. And I want to build that into your head to be counting jumps and air dashes, and once they're out, you have to punish it properly. Because they're not double jumping now, you could introduce a new option, run under. Now against specifically offensive double jump, it's a little bit harder because there's so much things that they could still do that isn't just a double jump at you. And doing a run under right here is pretty risky, but it is an option and will be an option present in all the double jump scenarios. I'll say how to use it. Remember the main goal of it is try to bait an anti-air or some sort of answer. So to try to flinch 3C like that, then double jump will win. However, if they're not flinching at all, then I don't recommend you continue to do this because again, it's a slower jump in. It gives them more time to react to an option. As per usual with the layering, if they're trying to air intercept you a lot, you can always introduce a high JC to hit them in the air. And also you could air dash if you want to continue to play the baity style. Now let's talk about IED and all the jump air dash variations. So I'll show you all of them right here. IED. IED jump. Jump air dash. Jump air dash jump. And even higher jump air dash jump. So if they're just doing air dash, usually your answer is 2 things. Either you place a preemptive button to stop the run up air dash in general, or you react to the air dash itself with some sort of option. So for myself, I usually resort to reacting to it with 3C. However, this may not be applicable for you if you cannot react to IED in neutral like this. It is pretty difficult and pretty tight to actually react to 3C with this. But if you can, that is your usual option. Otherwise, you could try to place a preemptive button to stop the IED attempt in general. Or you can get out of the situation. The other thing that they could do is do a jump and then air dash. But in the same way, you could 3C this. However, the main strength in doing a jump air dash, because 1, it covers more distance than a normal IED, and 2, it's a different timing from an IED. For example, if I try to react to IED with 3C, with both these options included, I could probably get one, but get hit by the other. See right there, I'm just too slow because the jump IID has a little bit more delay, so I have to wait a little bit longer. However, IID is instant, so I can't check both at the same time. It's just not possible. The final option that they could do is any air dash into a jump. Now you cannot 3C this, of course, because 3C will whiff because they jump after. Also, they could jump in a way where JA whiffs as well. In these cases, it's pretty hard to deal with, but you have to acknowledge that if they do any sort of air dash into jump, they're out of options. Remember that IID also burns up a jump, meaning if they do a normal IID jump, then they cannot jump after, they're out of options. Same with the normal jump air dash. They're out of options at this point, so keep that in mind. For how to deal with this, it really depends on how they air dash jump. For example, they can air dash jump with a jump in mind to do a jump in button. It's like this, with the intention to hit me on the ground. So in this case, J is pretty good here. However, if they really want to bait an option from you, a common option they like to do is IID jump backwards. You can't properly just jump in JA here, as you'll whiff. In cases like this, you probably have to commit to a super jump instead, or a run-up jump. Both of these options are quite committal, and this is something you have to learn beforehand before you do. Now if you're a maniac, and you're expecting a jump after the IID, you can commit to a hard run under. Now if you're a maniac, you can't do this, and this will throw them off, but of course, you'll lose immediately to a normal IID. This is a hard read if you're expecting the opponent to actually try to bait something out of you. Once again, if you do this, you're a maniac.
Yeah, choke.
Like Street Fighter 6, we got some throw loops going on.
Now I talked about all the options, but now it's time to talk about if they mix all of them at once. This is extremely hard to deal with because it's all different timings, and you can't check one without checking the other. For example, I could 3C an IID. However, I cannot 3C an IID jump. So in a situation like this, where they're really mixing up their timings and you can't quite properly anti-air them like this, the best you could do is either preempt the JA or get out of the situation immediately. Preempt the JA covers for a lot of these options. I could put these at random and JA should win for most of them. The issue of this, of course, is that this is a preemptive action. You can't quite properly react to all options at once. You have to do this preemptively, and this could lead to a scramble or something. As for how to use it, you honestly could just literally just use it. They cannot check all 4 timings at the same time unless they're cracked. So you can just honestly just do it in neutral and see how they act, and then just play around accordingly. If they like reacting to your IID with 3C, you always just do IID jump at any time. But for the most part, just rotate. IID at them, jump IID, IID jump. Pretty much mix this at any sort of time. If you still remember the 3 concepts, remember you can apply it here. If they're dead set on looking trying to anti-air you, you can always just try to run up instead of doing an IID, because they will not be expecting the run up button, or run up throw, or whatever run up option you do. Now before anyone gets mad that I didn't introduce any horizontal air dashes, well here it is. You can still do the same things as a normal air dash. Jump IID, IID jump. You can still do all of that. There may be some slight differences in the angles that the opponent has to cover, or like how you air dash, like this goes pretty far out, more than normal. But for the most part, you can still apply the things here. So in this section we'll be talking about defensive double jump, which is easily one of the most common double jumps that you could do, where you up back twice. This is vastly different from the single jump, because you need a double jump to get more information, and to see how your opponent reacts. And also because you're higher up in the air, the opponent has to commit more to it. Just think of this exactly like a defensive single jump, where you see how they place the JC, whether it hits the air to cover for air airs, or hits the ground to cover for run-ups. Now the most important thing against defensive double jump is seeing how they react, or if they react to it at all. If you watch the 3 concept section, we are pretty much reviewing this exactly. Seeing how they react, or if they're doing preemptive options. Now let's talk about if they use their final option. an air dash after the double jump. They got a back air dash, or like a forward air dash. Now this movement is easily one of the most common movement patterns I've ever seen, and if they're doing it in an autopilot way, then you need to punish this type of movement. You must stop them from doing this because they're out of options, so it is very free to punish after they burn all their options. The first thing I like to do is usually wait for their action if they use double jump. If they see me really far away, they may be inclined to air dash like that. In this case, 3C is absolutely free here. Instead of air dashing forward, you could also air dash back just to get more distance from you. In cases like this, I like running up and 3C'ing them. Both forward and backward air dash may be done in a very autopilot-y way, so what I like doing after every double jump they do is sprint after the double jump. If they forward air dash, I catch with 3C. If they backward air dash, I still catch with 3C. For forward air dash, alternatively, you can just run up 2C as well. Those examples shown before are if they autopilot and air dash. If they don't even air dash at all, then you're probably going to get a hit if you try to sprint at them. For you to beat the high air JC, all you have to do is run up. And if you do a low to the ground JC, you either run up JA or super jump JA. As I mentioned previously, because they are doing double jumps now, you can still represent a run under here as well. Remember with run under that they still have an air dash remaining. So if they still have an air dash, they may be inclined to still use it after you run under them. Especially if they have a cross-up button, like Miyako. In this case, you can still 3C here, of course. Even if they don't have a cross-up button, they'll still probably do this just to try to mix you up, like this. And hit you on this side. But still, 3C is once again free. They pretty much have to back air dash or else they'll get hit on the landing. Of course this is different if they have a cross-up button, but most characters don't have a cross-up button, so they pretty much are screwed here unless they back air dash. Of course the other option is for them to air dash forward to get away from you. Like that. In cases like this, it is pretty hard to contest their landing unless you read it well. This situation also doesn't have to apply when you run under them. You could already be really close to them as they jump, and they try to jump away, and then you can start reading their movement options after. As for how to use it properly, just remember not to autopilot and give your movement options meaning. What I mean by that is that you can start hovering to see what they want to do, and if they start doing JA like that, then you can start presenting some options in the air, like placing a high JC to stop them. Like that. And just in general, just try to mix up your movement options. If they're playing a certain way, like running under a lot, then you can introduce a lot of options like a low to the ground JC with one jump, for example, to throw them off. Now let's talk about super jump. Let's go over all the super jump variations that they could do. They could do super jump. They could do super jump jump. They could do super jump air dash. They could do super jump air dash jump. And they could do super jump jump air dash. You could pretty much just see this as a normal jump layering, where you could read the jump, double jump, and air dash and whatnot. But imagine the first jump as an air dash as well, because super jump is a very fast and immediate approach. That's something you have to respond to immediately, essentially. Now the main reason for them to do a jump is of course to bait an option from you. This is much more important with super jump rather than normal jump, because super jump is a lot more immediate. So if the opponent knows that you're trying to anti-air them, then they could just halt their momentum and see what you want to do. This may be difficult to deal with, as there's no way to properly distinguish between the two. Trying to J the super jump is pretty hard because after they super jump, they're already pretty high up in the air. So if you try a JA or even super jump JA, it's hard to hit them. It doesn't mean you can't hit them, it's just somewhat harder to do. Now my recommendation on how to deal with this really depends on how the opponent adapts to your situation. For example, if they don't know that you 3C their super jump often, they may just super jump at first, and once they figure out that you 3C a lot, they may change up their options. From personal experience, after I 3C their super jump a lot, they're really inclined to do super jump or any other option to bait an anti-air. So usually I just wait after they super jump and see what they want to do. And notice their positioning once again. It is just like a normal double jump all over again, where the only remaining option left is an air dash. Another option that they could do, super jump to air dash, which is a very unique way to stall their movement slightly. If I try a 3C here, a 3C will whiff, because a slight delay in the air dash allows me to whiff. We have a couple ways of going about doing this. First is JA. Now even though I said JA is not that good against a super jump, it'll still cover for a lot of options including super jump itself and this air dash super jump. The other option is to delay your anti-air slightly for the air dash, if you see them doing it a lot. Do note, however, that after the air dash from the super jump, they still have one more jump left. So just layer this like a normal air dash jump, in a way. Now admittedly, most opponents will probably not do this to target anti-air. They'd probably resort to the jump because jump is a lot safer. And even with like a slight delay on the air dash, they may still get clipped on anti-air, which means they probably will still try to jump rather than air dash to catch your anti-air attempt. From my personal experiences at least. I'll also quickly talk about jump super jump, where jump super jump has a really strange angle to properly anti-air, which makes it good as a jump in. It can be very annoying, especially if they have a cross-up button. In cases like this, just try to imagine this still like a normal double jump situation, while you're right below them, and trying to anti-air them. For how to use it, just think of it like a normal double jump, or just normal jump in. Air dash you always get in from any time, and depending on how they respond, just act accordingly. If they like to anti-air a lot, you can do super jump, and then layer behind that, and see how they act on your air stalls like that. The final thing we'll be talking about is character-specific air options, like dive kicks and air stalls. I'll try my best to generalize each, because each character is different. I'll start with dive kicks. Dive kicks are quite difficult to deal with outright, as there's such a sudden movement change in the air, and it's really hard to air intercept, especially since they can do it anywhere in the air, like really high up in the air, make it really hard to JA as well. It's also strangely really hard to 3C as well. The usual option against dive kicks is to pretty much let them do the dive kick. It's really hard to contest, so you just have to wait to see how they do it. You can pretty much outmove them in a way, so the dive kick will whip as well. Try your best to acknowledge how the dive kick angle is actually going to hit you. For example, against a mash dive kick, if you're right below her, it's probably never going to hit you, but she still might do it just to get away from you. If you acknowledge this, you can probably punish the landing as well. Now if you're a maniac, or you play Street Fighter 6, you could DP the dive kick. Now of course, this is just inhumane, but if you're out of options and you really want to answer it somehow, if you have a DP, it is an option. And of course, if all just fails, you can just stand shield. This is not something I usually recommend, but in the case of dive kicks, this is probably one of your couple options that you can actually do. Let's now talk about air dash type air stalls, like PCO J3B. Just imagine it's like another air dash I have to cover for, but you have to wait for an additional option. Notice how she burns both jumps and the air dash, but again, she still has J3B, so you have to watch out for that. So when you start counting, remember to count for that as well. Same goes for if she's trying to escape. She could just use all her jumps, an air dash, and J3B to get out. Remember to count the J3B once again. In the context of PCL, it's really annoying because you can mix 3 options essentially. IED, IED jump, and IED jump into J3B. All of which is really hard to track without missing the other. Now there's a variety of different air styles, but the main idea is just count all their options or just be aware of the option being presented. If they run out of options including the air style, it is a punish right after. For how to use it, you can use it however you want honestly. If you want to use it, you can just use it. Or if you want to see how the opponent moves, you could also target how they NCR you. Now that was a lot of scenarios to go over, and even that was overwhelming for me, admittedly. But now let's summarize everything in the section for better comprehension and how to play the air neutral, and now knowing all the scenarios along with the concepts binded. Let's establish a game plan and ask yourself these things. Do you want to target your air approaches? Do you want to constantly approach yourself? Think about the context of the current state of the match, and think about what you want to do here. If you want to target your opponent's approach, how are they doing it to begin with? Are they just air dashing you carelessly? If so, look to anti-air, but be aware of mix-up of jumps, and keep note how much they want to avoid your air intercepts and anti-airs. Are they always trying to air intercept you every time you jump? Think about how you could cover it, whether it be a preemptive button, or mixing up jump timings. Is the opponent always itching to approach you at all times, regardless of the context? If so, perhaps you could look to wait a little longer, and see if they're willing to run into you a lot, and react to those options freely. Are they running under a lot? It means you aren't mixing up your movement enough, and they're noticing you're playing in a hovery way, allowing for the run under. Mix up your options by introducing things like single jump. Are they the patient type, and you want to approach yourself? Think about how you could throw off their reaction. Are they always trying to 3C or anti-air you? Are they playing passive in the air and waiting for an option for you, and then reacting to it? Look to introduce different air options and run-ups to throw them off. Take note on how they're placing their air buttons. Is it preemptive or reactive? You can notice these things if you simply bait a movement option, or wait to see if they place a button preemptively, regardless of your positioning. Is it placed high or low to the ground? If the button's placed high, acknowledge it, and think about how you could stop it. A high placed button stops air intercepts, so look to run under if possible. If it's a low placed button, look to intercept early in the air with a run-up jump or a super jump button. Are they always expending their air options regardless of the context? Always look to punish these options that is guaranteed due to the opponent's options running out. We've gone through all the scenarios, all the concepts, all the techniques. It's now time to put it into practice. I'll be showing some replays and demonstrating some ideas and what I do in my perspective. So let's get started. we've reached the end of the guide. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you watched from the beginning till the end. It means a lot. This guide took me around 3 weeks to a month. I mean, very long. If I ended up missing anything in the neutral sections and whatnot, it is what it is. Neutral is a very dynamic part of the game, and sometimes I can miss some important details. But I hope the guide really helps you. I hope it helps everyone out, because honestly, my own guide helped myself out after making this and watching it myself. So I really hope it does help. So thanks again for watching the guide, and peace out.